Chapter 23, Sections 1 and 2 of J.B. Beery's The Student's Roman Empire, Part 2. Recording by Lenny. The Student's Roman Empire, Part 2, by John Bagnell Beery. Chapter 23, Nerva and Trajan and the Conquest of Dacia, 96 to 117 A.D. Sections 1 and 2. Section 1. Nerva. With the death of Domitian, the second imperial dynasty came to an end. But no disturbances took place like those which had followed the death of Nero. The new princeps M. Cosseius Nerva, who acceded on October 1st, A.D. 96, was not, like Galba, set up in the provinces or chosen by the soldiers. He was the elect of the Senate. He had no claim to the principate, either by lineage or by preeminent personal qualities. He was a clever jurist, an accomplished writer, and had been twice consul, but he owed his elevation to the fact that he was colorless. The senators, most of whom were doubtless privy to the conspiracy which overthrew the Flavian house, wanted an emperor who would be ready to concede a due share of government to themselves, but who at the same time would not be obnoxious to the army. Such a one they found in the inoffensive Nerva. He had never stood in the ranks of the senatorial opposition. On the contrary, he had taken part in suppressing the conspiracy of Piso, and had kept in favor with the Flavian emperors. Over 60 years of age, he was self-indulgent, tolerant, and mild, and the Senate expected to find him subservient to their guidance. His reign was greeted by the aristocrats as a new epoch. Coins were issued with the inscription Libertas Publica and Roma Renascens. At length it seemed to the most bitter adversaries of Caesarism that liberty and the principate, things formerly irreconcilable, had been happily blended. If Cato himself were restored to life, says an epigrammatist, he would be a Caesarian. It is to be observed that Nerva, like Vespasian, adopted, as a matter of course, the name Caesar, which by this time had become as necessary a part of the imperial nomenclature as imperator itself. From Nerva the Senate obtained the guarantee which they had sought in vain from the Flavians. The new princeps took a solemn oath that he would put no member of that order to death. The Senate had good reason to be satisfied with his administration, for he consulted it on every matter. The measures taken against the instruments of Domitian's cruelty were mild, owing to the moderate character of Nerva, who would not satisfy the general outcry for revenge. The exiles, including the philosophers, were recalled, and the sufferers and their friends were eager to punish the delators who had been the cause of their wrongs. Gaius Plinius Secundus, the younger Pliny, as he is generally called, thought it a good opportunity to assail the guilty, avenge the unfortunate, and advance himself. Accordingly, he attacked Certus, one of Domitian's ministers in the Senate. Certus had laid hands on Helvidius Priscus in the Curia, and Helvidius was a friend of Pliny. But Nerva did not permit a process to be instituted against Certus, though he went so far as to refuse him the consulship and supersede him in the praetorship. The suits which the injured were bringing against the delators were stopped at the instance of a senator named Fronto, who proposed a general act of pardon. He is said to have used words which, epigrammatically, express the weakness of Nerva. It is bad to have a princeps under whom no one may do anything. It is worse to have one under whom every one may do anything. The oath of security which Nerva gave to the Senate implied the abolition of processes for maiestas. Moreover, slaves were forbidden to accuse their masters of impiety, or of leading a Jewish life, which seems to have been a frequent charge in the reign of Domitian. But though the Senate had condemned the memory of Domitian, Nerva did not allow all his acts to be abolished. That, for example, against mutilation was confirmed, and the marriage of uncles and nieces was forbidden, a principle acknowledged by Domitian when he refused to marry Julia. Moreover, the beneficia granted by him were confirmed. In the public finances Nerva, like Vespasian, had difficulties to contend with. The tyranny of Domitian's later years was, as we have seen, partly due to the needs of an exhausted treasury. Nerva was obliged to suspend temporarily the celebration of games and the distributions of corn in Rome. A senatorial commission was appointed for considering the question of ways and means and the best manner of economizing. The emperor sacrificed a large amount of imperial property, and the crisis was, at length, tided over. Then Nerva set himself to relieve his subjects of some of the most unpopular taxes. He abolished the tax which Vespasian had levied on the Jews, and which had called forth bitter discontent. He relieved Italy of the cost of supporting the imperial post, the cursus publicus, within her own borders, and transferred the burden to the fiscus. This tax was called vehiculatio, and it continued to remain in force for the provinces. He also reduced the 5% duty on inheritances. From an economical point of view, the short reign of Nerva was retrogressive. It was characterized by an exclusive and narrow attention to the interests of Italy. This was to be expected from a government which was so much under the influence of the Senate. The ideal of the Senate was to maintain the supremacy of Rome and Italy and to keep the provinces in a subordinate place, whereas one of the chief tendencies of imperial policy, the policy inaugurated by Caesar himself, was to raise the provinces to the position of importance which they had a right to claim. But Italy, perhaps, had been too much neglected by previous rulers, and it was only fair that she should have her turn now. The decline of Italian agriculture was a serious disaster which had attracted the attention of Domitian, and he had sought to remedy it by forbidding land to be drawn from the cultivation of corn and appropriated to the produce of wine. Nerva's plan was to send out colonies of agriculturists, but he had not enough money at his disposal to make this remedy really effective. He bought up large lots of land and appointed a commission of senators, quatuorviri agro dividundo, to divide it. It is important to observe that the agrarian law of Nerva was a true lex, passed at the comitia of the people. Nerva, like Claudius, revived the old republican form, for the last time. More effectual and important for the welfare of Italy than his attempt to heal the irremediable agrarian evil was Nerva's system of alimentary institutions. These were designed to help the education of the children of poor parents. For each town which received the benefit of this endowment, a certain sum of money was set aside at once and lent to landed proprietors, and the annual interest which it produced formed the support of the alimentary institution. As the investment rested on land, it was secure, and the state on its part undertook not to withdraw the loan. The control of the administration of this charity was probably placed in the hands of men of senatorial rank, the curatores viarum. Nerva's successors carried out the organization of the institution more thoroughly. The brevity of Nerva's reign gave him little time for executing public works, but he completed the Forum Transitorium which Domitian had left unfinished, connecting the Templum Pacis with the Forum of Augustus. This new forum was marked by the Temple of Minerva, and was called the Forum of Nerva. The policy of Nerva was marked by mildness, even by weakness. He boasted that he had done no act which could prevent him from resigning the principate, if he chose, with perfect security. His clemency, however, was the one feature which did not satisfy the senatorial party. A story is told that Mauricus, who had returned from exile, was supping one evening with Nerva, and the prudent Veiento, a notorious creature of Domitian, was also present, reclining in a place of honor next the emperor. The conversation chanced to turn on the blind delator Catullus, who had lately died. "If he were still living," said Nerva, "what would his fate be?" "He would be supping with us," replied Mauricus, glancing at Veiento. But though Nerva was mild, perhaps because he was so mild, conspiracies were formed against him. That of Calpurnius Crassus, a descendant of the Triumvir, was easily put down, and Crassus was banished, not to an island, but to the pleasant city of Tarentum. A more dangerous movement originated in the Praetorian camp. Casperius Aelianus, one of the Praetorian prefects under Domitian, and retained in the post by Nerva, excited the soldiers to demand the execution of the murderers of Domitian, especially the freedman Parthenius and the other prefect, Petronius Secundus, although more than a year had passed since the event. Nerva, indeed, bared his own neck, and offered to die himself instead of the victims, but he was forced to comply, about October 97 A.D. This experience decided Nerva, who was weak in health and felt himself unable to cope with the difficulties of government or manage the soldiers, to follow the example of Augustus, Galba, and Vespasian, and chose a consort who should also be his presumptive successor. He had kinsfolk of his own, but he passed them over, and regarded the interests of the state, not those of his own family. His choice, guided by his adviser Lucius Licinius Sura, fell on Marcus Ulpius Trajanus, the legatus of Upper Germany, and the result proved that it could not have fallen upon any one better fitted for the post. Trajan was a Spaniard of Italica, a municipium close to Hispalis in Baetica. His father had served with distinction in the Jewish war, and held the proconsulate of Asia. The son, born on September 18th, 52 A.D., had been brought up as a soldier, and seen 10 years' active service as a military tribune. He then went through the cursus honorum, and obtained the praetorship in 85 A.D. We next meet him in Spain, when, on the outbreak of the revolt of Antonius Saturninus, he was ordered by Domitian to lead one of the Spanish legions, first adiutrix, of which he was clearly legatus, to Upper Germany, but the rising was suppressed before his arrival. His promptitude was rewarded by an eponymous, or ordinary consulship, in 91 A.D., a great honor coming from Domitian, who was usually first consul of the year himself. He was afterwards appointed legatus of Upper Germany. He was probably at Vindonissa when Nerva addressed a letter to him, offering him a share in the imperium, explaining his own difficulties, and calling upon him to take vengeance on those who had tormented him with the Homeric line, "May the Danae pay for my tears beneath thy shafts." But without waiting for the consent of Trajan, Nerva proceeded without delay to perform the ceremony of adoption in his absence. The Pannonian legions had gained a victory over the Savians, who were still hostile, and to celebrate it the citizens had assembled on the summit of the Capitol, in front of the temple of Jove. There Nerva declared the adoption of his son and consort in these words: "I adopt Marcus Ulpius Nerva Trajanus. May it prove fortunate to the Senate, the Roman people, and myself." Thus Trajan became the son of Nerva, and, like Nerva himself, Caesar. It remained to confer upon him the proconsular power, and this was done in due form by a decree of the Senate. But he was not only made imperator; he also, like Titus, received the tribunician power at the same time. This probably means that the tribunician lex was proposed in the Senate at the same time, and then, after the due interval, brought before the comitia. The elevation of Trajan to the second place in the empire took place on the 27th of October 97 A.D., and from this day Trajan dated his tribunician years. In consequence of the Pannonian victory mentioned above, Both Nerva and Trajan assumed the name Germanicus. They were designated as colleagues in the consulship for the following year. Nerva died on January 27th, 98 A.D. His acts were confirmed, and he was enrolled among the gods as a matter of course. And Trajan, son of the divine Nerva, was elected princeps and Augustus. Section 2. Trajan on the Rhine. A new epoch in imperial history may be said to begin with the accession of Trajan. Hitherto all the emperors had been of Roman or Italian origin. The elevation of the first Italian, the Sabine Vespasian, had been a novelty, but this was a small innovation compared with the raising of a provincial to be head of the Roman world, master of Rome herself. Not a murmur was heard at the election of Trajan, the Spaniard, though his birthplace, Italica by the Betis, was not even a colonia. How far Roman opinion had progressed during the past century in regard to the provinces may be estimated if we recollect that Augustus had hesitated to admit inhabitants of Transpadane Italy into the Praetorian Guards. Trajan was not required to return to Rome on his adoption by Nerva. He seems to have continued to hold the post of legatus of Upper Germany, combining it as Titus combined the Praetorian prefecture with his imperial position. But it is probable that by virtue of his proconsular power, perhaps by the special ordinance of Nerva, he exercised beyond his own province a control over Lower Germany as well. He would thus have held a position somewhat similar to that held by Drusus, Tiberius, and Germanicus. This will explain the fact that the news of Nerva's death reached him not in the upper but in the lower province, at Colonia Agrippinensis. The new emperor did not immediately return to Rome. He saw that there was work to be done on the Rhine, and he stayed to do it. Some time before, intestine quarrels had broken out among the Bructeri. A chieftain was expelled from their land and had returned with the help of neighboring tribes. The governor of Lower Germany, Vastricius Spurina, also assisted in the restoration of the Bructerian king, who after his victory settled a large number of the Chamavi and Angrivarii in Bructerian territory, in order to maintain his position with their help against his own countrymen. Trajan seized the opportunity of these domestic dissensions to strengthen the fortifications of the Rhine, to complete and improve the work begun by the Flavians. Some ascribe to him the erection of the rampart and forts in the Agrae Decumates, which in the foregoing chapter was described as the work of the Flavians. In any case, Trajan went on with work which was begun by them. It is certain that a road on the right bank of the Rhine, leading from Moguntiacum southward, crossing the Nicer near the present Heidelberg, and passing Aquae in the direction of Offenburg, was constructed under the auspices of Trajan in 100 A.D. To him also Aquae, Baden, may attribute the beginning of her prosperity, as well as other towns in the same region, such as Sumelocena, Rottenburg, on the Nicer, and Lopodunum, Ladenburg. On the Minas, not far from Moguntiacum, he constructed a castellum, called after himself, but its site cannot be identified. About a mile lower than the old Vetura he founded a new fortress, which was afterwards called Colonia Traiana. Having spent the summer of 98 A.D. in the German provinces, Trajan proceeded to the Danube, and spent the ensuing winter in making preparations for a Dacian war, which, as he foresaw, was inevitable. At this time a road on the right bank of the Danube was made in the neighbourhood of Tierna, near the present Orsova. Public interest at Rome was awakened in the operations of Trajan by the timely appearance of the Germania of Tacitus, giving a picturesque account of the manners and customs of the Teutonic peoples with which Rome had been brought in contact. Tacitus personally had some local knowledge of the subject, as he had been either legatus of a legion in Germany or governor of Belgica from 90 to 94 A.D. His interest in Germany was stimulated by an instinctive perception that Rome's greatest danger lay in that quarter. the liberty of the Germans is more active than the kingdom of the Atracids. Reviewing the past history of the relations between Roman and Teuton, he makes use of that pregnant expression, tam diu Germania vincitur, so long is Germany in the process of being conquered. The Germania contains an account of the Teutons in general, and also notices of the particular tribes. The Germans have now reached a more advanced stage of civilization than that which Caesar described 120 years before. The communities no longer migrate from one part of the territory to another, but each community of the tribe has a permanent village settlement and a certain area of arable land, although their wealth still consists chiefly in cattle, and there is a considerable advance in local organization. Agriculture has become general, and each man has a fixed home. The love of hunting has declined, perhaps owing to the decrease of beasts of chase, and the warriors during times of peace devote themselves to the wine bowl and to gambling. The arrangement which formerly held for the communities or families now holds for the individual freeman. Each freeman receives an allotment of land from the community, and his allotment is changed every year. As there is a large quantity of waste land available, the arable area is changed annually, and nothing is grown on it but corn. But though the freeman has no permanent landed property, he has a permanent right to a share in the land of the community, and he has complete ownership of his homestead. He has also a right to a share in the common pasturage. But though these facts testify to a considerable development since the days of Caesar and Ariovistus, there are many social features which still survive. They are still without cities, and their buildings are very rudely put together. They are still chaste, they are still plain and simple in dress, and they are still indifferent to merchandise. Differences in social rank and dignity seem to have been of three kinds. 1. Some were more wealthy, that is, possessed more cattle than others, and those who were more wealthy must have had a larger share of pasture and arable land. It is true that all the allotments of land were equal, but then one man may have held more than one allotment. 2. Some were noble by race, or descendants of kings or gods or great chieftains, and others were not. Those tribes which adopted monarchy chose their kings on account of nobility. This distinction of nobiles and ingenui probably involved no inequality in political rights. 3. Besides the freeborn, including the nobles, who possessed political rights, were the freedmen and servi. There were two kinds of servi: a. the slaves, consisting of those who lost their freedom by gambling, and perhaps prisoners of war; and b. the cultivators of the land, corresponding to the Roman coloni. This second class was far the more important, and probably consisted of the original occupiers of the land who had been subdued by the German tribe when it took possession. The German colon, as we may call the slave of this class, possessed a home of his own, and was personally free, except in relation to his lord, whom he could not desert, and his land, which, like the medieval serf, he could not forsake. He paid to his lord a fixed quantity of corn, or cattle, or clothing. His lot was not hard, but his lord might kill him with impunity. The administration of the tribe resided in the tribe or civitas itself, whether the tribe adopted monarchy or not. The National Assembly, which met at the new or full moon, wielded the power. All the free-born members of the community attended it in arms, without distinction of seat. In their assemblies questions of war and peace were determined. The magistrates who administered justice were elected, and it acted as a court of justice itself. The magistrates, or principes, as Tacitus calls them, had the right of keeping a comitatus. This characteristic German institution was a body of warriors attached to a chieftain, who provided them with their equipment and entertained them. They fought for him in war, and were bound to defend him and attribute to him their own brave deeds. Their chief employment was war, and the dignity and fame of the chieftain depended largely on the number and efficiency of his companions. The Principes acted independently of each other, each in his district, in time of peace, but in war all obeyed a leader chosen by the common council. Royalty, in those tribes where it existed, was of a very limited nature, and involved rather honorary privileges than political power. The host or military force of the tribe consisted of both cavalry and infantry. The cavalry was composed of the comitatus of the Principes. The infantry was of two kinds. Each district, pagus, sent 100 chosen champions or fighting men, who fought in front in battle, and besides these there was the mass of the freemen, who were arranged in families. At the beginning of 99 A.D., Trajan returned from the Danube to Rome, where he was received with warm and unfeigned enthusiasm, and became consul for the third time. He renewed the pledge which he had already given to the Senate in writing, that he would not condemn a senator to death, and this oath he always respected. He had received from the fathers the title of pater patriae. He avenged the tears of Nerva by punishing the mutineers of the Praetorian Guard, and he was so confident in his own military authority that he restored by 1/2 the usual donative to the soldiers, and no murmur was heard. In handing to the Praetorian prefect the dagger which was a sign of his office, Trajan employed the celebrated words, "Use this for me, if I do well; against me, if I do ill." His moderate demeanor conciliated the senators, and his wife Plotina conducted herself with the same modesty. As she entered the palace, she is reported to have turned to the multitude, and said that she entered it with a perfect equanimity, as she would wish to leave it, if fate required. General satisfaction was felt when Trajan punished the delators whom Nerva had spared. Some were executed, others banished. Trajan only remained 2 years at Rome, and then proceeded to deal with the Dacian question, which the mission had not settled. Of his work in administration and legislation during those 2 years, some account will be given in the following chapter. End of chapter 23, sections 1 and 2.